A storm night on the North Sea. Westerly winds lash straight in. Waves rise at times over 20 meters. Steel hulls shudder like strings on a violin. Just the last century has already given chilling numbers. In 1953, a storm surge swept across the coasts of the Netherlands, England, and Belgium, killing more than 2,500 people. In 1962, water surged up the Elbe River, leaving more than 300 dead in Hamburg. Beneath lies a graveyard of ships. The Goodwin Sands alone has swallowed more than 2,000 vessels over the centuries. Dawn opens as if someone drew a curtain. The surface flat as freshly polished glass, thin sunlight scattering gold over the wave's edge, the air sharp with salt and the smell of wet grass and the dew. On the soft sand, human and dog footprints weave together. Farther out, a round seal's head pops up, peers curiously as if to say, "Good morning," then disappears. Birds glide across eye level, wings whispering like threads, and the whole sea breathes so gently that your heart slows to match it. Today, we will explore why the North Sea is among the most dangerous in the world. It has two faces. You're looking at a tight pocket of water in northwestern Europe. On the left is the United Kingdom. On the right runs a long chain of coasts: Norway, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. To the south are the Strait of Dover and the English Channel. To the north, the Norwegian Sea and the Atlantic. To the east, a narrow thread, Skagerrak and Kattegat, leans into the Baltic. On a map, it's neat and self-contained, about 570,000 kilometers wide. On the water, it's a different story. The North Sea is shallow where you'd expect depth, and deep where you'd expect flats. Most of the southern basin sits around 30-50 meters. The average is roughly 90 meters. Not much water when storms need room to burn off their energy. Farther north, the bottom drops into the Norwegian Trench, a cold groove about 725 meters deep. Those differences aren't small. They decide where waves stand up, where currents speed up, and where a ship can or shouldn't go when the weather shifts. The southern half of the North Sea is largely shallow, about 30-50 meters, with an average near 90 meters. Picture it as a huge metal tray of water. Then, near Norway, the seafloor suddenly falls away into the Norwegian Trench, an underwater canyon about 725 meters deep. That shape matters. Shallow water makes waves taller and currents faster. Deep cuts change where ships have room to move when the weather turns bad. The weather here changes often. Westerly winds from the Atlantic pour in and funnel straight into this basin. Storms visit frequently, especially in autumn and winter. Because the water is shallow, it can't absorb wind energy the way a deep ocean does. Think bathtub versus swimming pool. Waves build fast, short, steep, heavy sets. In a real blow, they can top 20 meters. At that point, crews stop asking how tall the waves are and start counting the seconds between hits. That's why the North Sea has crushed wooden warships, shattered steel hulls, and swallowed whole fleets without warning. For centuries, it has been a battlefield, a shipping lane, and an industrial frontier all rolled into one. It's where rival powers fought for control, where oil platforms buckled in storms, and where submarines stalked convoys in near silence. Its seabed holds more wrecks than most seas. Fishing boats still pass over them, often unaware of what lies just below. Now, add pressure. This is the pathway for frequent low-pressure systems. Combine those with high tides and strong winds, and you have a storm surge recipe. The one people still mention in a low voice came in 1953. Coastal defenses failed in parts of the Netherlands, the UK, and Belgium. More than 2,500 people died. Thousands of homes were destroyed, and wide tracts of land were flooded. A few years later, in 1962, a North Sea flood pushed up the Elbe toward Hamburg. Dikes failed. Over 300 people died. Policies changed after that. Engineering did too. The sea rode in water, and Europe answered in concrete, steel, and new procedures. Vulnerability isn't the same everywhere. The southern and southeastern coasts, the lowlands of the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, sit at or below sea level and lack the natural walls that cliffs provide. The British and Norwegian coasts stand higher, but height only changes the type of risk. Where land is tall, waves have room to break hard. Where land is flat, water can push far inland. Tides bring their own math. Along England's east coast and into the German Bight, tides can rise and fall by more than 23 feet, over 7 meters. That much water doesn't just lift and lower ships. It moves like a river across a bumpy sea floor. As it runs over sandbanks and bars, it speeds up, slows down, and shifts sideways, creating crossflows and eddies. The result is a confused sea. Waves coming from different directions at once. The kind that makes a wheelhouse go quiet and the crew focus. And the weather flips fast. Calm at noon, sleet an hour later. A fog bank thick as wool. Then a squall line that looks stitched across the sky. Forecasts and radar improve the odds. But unpredictability is still part of the job. For merchant captains sliding between Rotterdam, Hamburg, and the North Atlantic. For fishermen feeling a net bite over shoal water. Even for navies playing chess in heavy weather. Beneath you, the bottom is crowded. Pipelines, cables, and a long inventory of wrecks. This seabed holds more lost ships than most seas its size. Wooden warships softened under silt. Steam-era iron curled like paper. Modern hulls that ended their story in fog or snow. Off Goodwin Sands, a place some call the ship swallower, more than 2,000 vessels have met the bottom across the centuries. History isn't locked in museums here. It still snags the occasional trawl. And above, industry draws its own map. Since the late 1960s, oil and gas have lifted platforms out of the water, like cities on stilts. Fields such as Ekofisk and Brent turned the North Sea into a frontier where engineering and weather meet daily. Technology helps. Floating rigs, subsea pipelines, remotely operated vehicles. But some risks remain. In 1980, the semi-submersible Alexander Keeland failed in a storm when a fatigue crack found a weak point in a leg. 123 workers died. Even fixed giants know the North Sea by first name. Passenger ferries aren't immune. In 1987, the roll-on, roll-off ferry Herald, a free enterprise, left a Belgian port with the bow doors open, took water onto the car deck, and capsized within minutes on a route tied, in spirit and in practice, to this sea. 193 lives were lost. In 1979, in thick fog off Sussex, the Aeolian sky went down after a collision, scattering cargo, brand new vehicles, and bundles of banknotes across the bottom. The North Sea is an accountant who never loses count, even when the ledger fills slowly. Zoom out, and the political layout comes into focus. The surface is divided into exclusive economic zones. Those lines decide who sets rules for fishing, drilling, wind farms, and environmental policy. Most boundaries were set by the 1970s, but arguments didn't vanish. They moved inside the lines. Fishing rights still spark disputes. After changes like Brexit, boats flying different flags sometimes work the same waters with different expectations, and tension often shows up on deck before it's heard on the radio. Woven through all of it is history you can still touch. The North Sea was a battlefield in the age of sail and the age of steel. Those chapters didn't close neatly. Mines, torpedoes, shells. Not everything sown has been cleared. Jutland, World War I's biggest naval clash, left twisted metal on the bottom off Denmark. World War II, seeded these waters with wrecks and hazards you can still meet if you catch the wrong thing in the wrong net. Underwater, a century isn't long ago. And that's how the North Sea, this shallow gray sea, can be Europe's hardest classroom. The North Sea didn't become dangerous when we added steel to it. It was dangerous long before charts, lighthouses, or radios. Dangerous when Britain wasn't even an island. The North Sea tsunami. It was the deadliest natural disaster in the history of England. About 8,000 years ago. Let's take a look at what the coast of Northern Europe looked like back then. We'll take that map and pull it backward into the past, all the way to the end of the Ice Age. The Northern Europe you see then would be completely different. During the Ice Age, sea levels in Europe were drastically lower, 122 meters. Instead of England and Ireland standing apart, there was a single massive landmass connected to the rest of Europe by a dry tundra strip covered with shrubs. Archaeologists call this lost land Doggerland. Doggerland was not a legend, it was livable. This stretch of tundra was basically uninhabited until the world began to warm. As the ice sheet slowly retreated, prehistoric people moved north, following the trails of wild animals. And, perhaps to their surprise, not long after, they found themselves in an ancient paradise. Picture lakes, slow-flowing rivers, reed beds full of fish, and shorelines stretching into wide, shallow bays where shellfish were easy to gather. The climate was slightly warmer than today. Hazelnut trees and berry bushes grew thick. Deer and other game roamed along the forest edges. In the water, fish and seals foraged where the tides met the river mouths. For people who lived by skill and season, this was a generous land. Contrary to the image we have in our minds of the Stone Age as a time when people lived in caves and clubbed each other, life in this ancient land was actually quite sophisticated. The population wasn't dense by modern standards, no towns, no walls, but it wasn't empty. Best estimates suggest up to 100,000 people across the broader region. Families lived in semi-permanent camps that shifted with the year. Winters favored the estuaries and protected bays, where fish runs were reliable and wood for fires was close. Summers pushed inland toward game and berries. Nomadic here doesn't mean primitive. It means planned movement in a landscape people knew well. Their tools were good. We have evidence of boat building, of fine stone tools, and even wooden slipways placed where a boat could be hauled and launched. That slipway detail matters. It tells us people weren't just improvising at the water's edge. They were engineering the shore for repeated use, and this last point is very important. They also met one another. Mesolithic people in England and Doggerland spent more time cooperating than arguing over who had the better loincloth. Archaeological traces suggest seasonal gatherings on the low cliffs above the seal rookeries, places where resources were abundant and the vantage point allowed them to see who was arriving. This was the Stone Age's version of the Glastonbury Festival, a time to trade, arrange marriages, repair tools, share news, and tell stories. With no writing, every rule and memory was stored in people's minds. The safe paths, the rich places, the cautionary tales. In daily life here, the sea was both a provider and a road. In short, this was a vibrant world, with complex societies interacting across hundreds of kilometers. If you asked them what this place was called, they would not say Doggerland. For Mesolithic Europeans, it surely had another name. For the roughly 100,000 ancient people, it was simply home. By the time families had settled into Doggerland's yearly rhythm, the place began to change in two quiet ways. First came a distant event that affected the entire region. In North America, a massive meltwater lake, Lake Agassiz, though massive, hardly does it justice. Lake Agassiz was larger than all of today's Great Lakes combined, closer in size to the Black Sea than to Lake Superior. It burst around 6200 BC, flooding fresh water into the North Atlantic. That briefly cooled northern Europe and raised sea levels a little. On the ground, it showed up as small but steady inconveniences. The coastline crept inland. Dry meadows turned to marsh. Paths that had been firm for generations went soggy or disappeared at high tide. Winds felt sharper and colder. The broad plain began breaking into more tidal flats, more islands, and a narrowing land bridge to Europe. People adjusted. They moved camps a bit more often, fished more, and treated boats as everyday tools, not special trips. If the story had stopped there, Britain might have stayed loosely connected to the continent by a low, wet strip for a long time. But while everyone was coping with higher water and colder gusts, another change was building far offshore, out of sight. Deep under the Norwegian shelf, the seabed was slowly losing its grip. When it finally let go, the water wouldn't just rise, it would rush back. That is the turn in the story we're heading to next. Off Norway, the seafloor looks calm, but below the surface it was slowly being set up to fail. For ages, that slope was made of loose sediments with pockets of frozen methane mixed in, icy glue that helps hold things together. Cold temperatures and high pressure kept it stable. After the Ice Age, two slow changes began. The land bounced back. When the massive ice sheet over Scandinavia, what is now Norway and Sweden, melted, its weight lifted. The ground underneath rose very slowly, like a memory foam mattress after you get up. Even that gentle lift changes the stresses on a slope that's already delicate. The icy glue melted. Those methane hydrates thawed into gas. Gas takes up more space and doesn't bind grains. The seabed became looser and gassier, so layers that once held could slip. Put together, the slope was losing its grip. There's always a day when almost unstable becomes unstable. That day came around 6200 BC. We even have a clue about the season. Plant remains trapped in tsunami layers point to autumn, likely late October. In human terms, coastal camps were full again after summer trips inland. Winter stores were laid in, shelters finished, boats tied off. Then the slope let go. Geologists call it the Storra slide. Nearly 300 kilometers of continental shelf collapsed seaward in hours, moving about 3,000 cubic kilometers of sediment, enough, if dumped on land, to bury Scotland under roughly 8 meters, 26 feet of debris. Underwater, that mass didn't bury towns. It shoved the sea. When you push that much water fast, it doesn't just slosh and settle. It turns into a tsunami, a long, fast wave that can cross whole basins and keep its power until the coastline forces it to spend it. The key factor that made the North Sea tsunami so deadly was the time of year it struck. Because autumn was when Mesolithic people returned from summer hunting in the highlands to settle along the coast for the winter. Even though Britain's population at the time is thought to have been only about 50,000, nearly all of them were concentrated in coastal areas, mostly along the east coast, exactly where a killer wave was about to hit. No one on the North Sea's coasts had a word for tsunami. There were no temple stones telling people to run uphill when the water goes the wrong way. People around the Shetlands and the east coast of Scotland and across the shallow edges of Doggerland knew tide, storm, and surge. They did not know this. Of course, because there was no writing at the time, we don't know exactly what the disaster looked like. But we can guess. If it happened during the day, there were likely crude boats close to shore, fires burning outside Stone Age huts, people working or playing, eating, or in the middle of a ritual, perhaps neighbors chatting, keeping half an eye on the children. And the first sign must have been the strange withdrawal of the sea, the ocean pulling back violently, exposing flat expanses no one had ever seen bare in living memory. Minutes later, the first wave came in. In the Shetland Islands, the height may have reached 40 meters, about 130 feet. Along eastern Scotland, roughly 20 meters, taller than most trees, high enough to throw logs, stones, and boats inland as if they weighed nothing. In estuaries like the Forth, the shape of the land channeled the wave upriver. Funneled is the right word, carrying it perhaps 30 kilometers, about 19 miles, inland. On Doggerland, there was no cliff line to break the wave, no high ground to catch debris. The region was flat, tabletop flat. The water didn't meet a wall. It spread, a thick, unstoppable push across ground people trusted with their lives. They probably just stood and watched, confused, perhaps afraid, as the sea did something they had never seen before. A wave up to 40 meters high crashed in at a speed of 35 meters per second. The water was no longer a pool. It was a moving structure. It tore through everything in its path and dragged it along. Trees, houses, drying racks, firewood, tools, and people. And it wasn't one and done. Over the next hours, 2 more large waves arrived. Survivors of the first surge were hit again, then again. Measured against today's map, the water took roughly 7,000 square kilometers of Britain, an area about the size of Delaware, under during the event. The exact edges are lost to time. The sediment is not. Its layers tell the story cleanly. Marine sand where peat should be, shells and microscopic sea life on top of soils that formed in air. A coarse layer of mixed debris where quiet accumulation should have continued. Counting who was there and who was left. There are no names to read out, only numbers and the way those numbers fit with the landscape. Britain's Mesolithic population may have been near 50,000. If a quarter died, that is around 12,000 people, many of them coastal, because autumn is when communities return to shore to settle in for the winter. By population proportion, it was unrivaled. Only the Black Death, 14th century, killed a higher proportion of the English. Doggerland's population, possibly near 100,000, had an even worse exposure profile. Low, flat, and open to a wave that runs, not climbs. No one can give a precise Doggerland toll. The adjective that fits is awful. The first day's dead were not the end of it. Normally, when a major disaster hits the modern world, there are agencies like FEMA standing by to keep the aftermath from becoming worse than the disaster itself. Of course, this doesn't always go smoothly, as the people of New Orleans in 2005 could tell you. but at least there is an effort at disaster relief. Sadly, the Mesolithic world did not work that way. After the threefold tsunami had battered them, the prehistoric people of Britain were left to fend for themselves. Winter was coming fast. Much of the food for winter, dried fish, smoked meat, stored nuts, would have been washed away. Boats were smashed or dumped inland, out of reach. Nets and tools were gone. Elders who held roots in their heads, hunters who could read a shoreline by smell and wind, might have been lost that afternoon. The coastal ecosystems themselves were disrupted. Beds of shellfish buried, channels scoured. There was no state to send help, no writing to coordinate distant camps. Surviving meant rebuilding with less of everything and fewer skilled hands. Many who lived through the waves died in the cold months from exposure, hunger, or illness. In parts of Denmark, the archaeological record hints at warfare in the aftermath. Clashes over resources among communities that had once cooperated more than they fought. It's exactly the pattern you would expect when a landscape stops providing in the ways people have planned for. And there was trauma, a modern word, but the right one. The sea had been a provider. In a single day, it revealed its capacity to be a destroyer. Imagine being a parent explaining to a child that the water went away and then came back like a wall, and not having any story from your parents' parents to make sense of it. With no written chronicle, with oral memory shredded by the deaths of the old, the story of the wave didn't become a legend with instructions. It became a layer in the ground. The tsunami didn't erase Doggerland by itself. The sea was already rising and would continue to rise. What the waves did was speed the transition and cut new routes for water to move across the plain. Safe paths to neighbors became creeks. A familiar meadow turned into a tidal flat. A campsite with good bones was now under every high water. Groups that could move inland to higher ground with drinkable water and firewood. Others stayed near the estuaries, salvaging what they could to rebuild boats and nets and banking their winter on fish and shellfish. Over years, the region settled into a new shape. Islands where ridges had been. A thin, unreliable land bridge rather than a dry belt. An older view held that Doggerland vanished the day the wave came. The better reading is this: Doggerland survived, damaged, for some time. But the trend line only went one way. By around 500 BC, the last high spots that could support life were gone. Britain became an island, not because a king drew a line, but because the ocean took the low ground and kept taking. Where did people go? Some likely followed the coast to new camps that suited the new map. There's a theory, not a proven fact, that descendants from the drowned plain helped populate places like Orkney, where later Stone Age sites rise from grass and rock. Whether that detail is right or wrong, the general story stands. People migrated, brought with them skills, boat building, net making, knowledge, where to find fish, how to read the sky, and stories, even if the tsunami itself faded as a clear tale. Meanwhile, the old plain earned a new name, Dogger Bank, now 2,100 meters underwater. Modern trawlers crossing it sometimes bring up animal bones, worked flint, or even tree trunks with roots, bits of a landscape that switched places with the sea. Long after the wave, people living where rivers met the sea told tales that rhyme with the facts. In Wales, there's the legend of Cantref Gwaelod, the bottom 100, a drowned land offshore. At low tide in Cardigan Bay, tree stumps appear on the waterline, physical proof that forest once stood where water now lies. Around Swansea Bay, people point to Crimlin Bog and talk about a drowned town beneath the reeds. In the late Middle Ages, storms and drifting sands forced outposts like Old Kenfig and Pennard Castle to be abandoned. These stories do not prove Storra. They do illustrate how the coastline shifts, sometimes fast, sometimes by grind, and how myth stores what minutes and maps can't. It was a catastrophe on par with anything in modern history. Titanic, 9/11, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, all pale beside this ancient disaster. Given the scale of destruction from the North Sea tsunami, scientists today are trying to answer a chilling question. Could it happen again? If you live in England, your experience with tsunamis probably goes no further than news reports from other countries. Though surrounded by sea, England is rarely hit the way Japan is. Occasionally, there are massive storms that tear up coastal roads and railways, like in the winter of 2013. But overall, the chances of seeing your house surfing on the crest of a wave are nearly zero. Or at least, that's what we in England like to believe. Yet if you dig into the historical record, you'll find more waves than you might expect. The biggest was likely the one that struck the Bristol Channel in early 1607, or late 1606 by the old Julian calendar. On January 30th, floodwaters suddenly surged from the Atlantic into the Channel, drowning villages and sweeping away herds of livestock. The flood killed about 2,000 people and left marks on churches and ancient stone bridges throughout the region. Still, though suspected to be a tsunami, a storm surge cannot be ruled out. The Cornwall case of 1755 is more certain. An offshore earthquake flattened Lisbon and sent tsunamis racing in all directions. One of them struck southern Cornwall. No one kept an exact death toll, but reports claimed great loss of life. So, tsunamis in England, while rare, are not total strangers. But there are also two other tsunamis in England's geological record, and disturbingly, they hit the very same place the North Sea tsunami once did, around 3000 BC and 500 AD. Shetland was struck twice, each wave at least 12 meters high. The cause remains mysterious, but it suggests that killer waves ravaging Scotland are not entirely uncommon. Even so, the odds of a tsunami striking England in your lifetime remain extremely low, virtually unthinkable. But, and this is a big but, that does not mean the odds are zero. If that were to happen, every scenario would be meaningless. If a new slide occurred near Svalbard or Greenland, it could hurl a massive wall of water towards Scotland, something not seen since that fateful autumn day 8,000 years ago. Waves over 10 meters high could slam into Edinburgh and Newcastle, causing destruction on a vast scale. Bridges swept away, cars lifted like toys, fires breaking out, smaller buildings collapsing, and everywhere people dragged into the arms of the water. Certain death, as if stepping in front of a speeding train. If you've ever seen footage of the Japanese tsunami surging inland, you know the horror that awaits. The slow-moving wall of death, the flood erasing roads and railways, countless lives lost. Of course, the likelihood of an event on the scale of Storra is not high. Scientists constantly monitor places that fit the formula: steep underwater slopes, layers of frozen gas in the seabed, methane hydrates, that can melt and weaken the ground, and regions still slowly rebounding after the Ice Age, making the soil layers unstable. Events on the scale of the Storra slide seem to occur only every many thousands of years. And today, we have tools that people 8,000 years ago did not. Seismographs, ocean buoys, seabed pressure sensors, satellites, and fast communication networks. These do not erase the danger, but they buy us more time to issue warnings, evacuate people, and protect critical systems. The right attitude is respect, not panic. Understand the risk, prepare for it, and continue living. Ask people who work this sea what danger feels like, and you won't get the same answer twice. You'll get a season. A Norwegian Coast Guard hand will tell you winter by sound alone. the slam of a bow that never quite resets before the next hit, the half-second pause the whole hull takes after an especially bad landing, the way the ship hums with stress. Then he'll shrug and tell you about summer, how a flat dawn on still water makes you feel the sky is larger than any country, and how freedom and confinement can feel like twins when your whole life is inside a steel skin. A retired merchant mariner who ran ore out of Narvik and Luleå will talk about predictable hazards that aren't. On paper, the route is clean. In practice, it's a lane through wreck fields left by wars, past rigs that weren't there last decade, under weather that forgets what it was doing an hour ago. He'll point to the chart and say, the North Sea kills quietly, by surprise and by accumulation. A local on Norderney will tell you that danger is often voluntary. The tourist who steps where the sign says, don't. The swimmer who decides lines on a beach are suggestions. We only swim where it's marked, they'll say. Not because locals love rules, but because they love coming home. The old line carries weight here. Nordsee ist Mordsee. The North Sea is a murder sea. It's not melodrama. It's a memory. A soldier will tell you about a night on a troop ship when a storm set in and turned a couple hundred healthy people into quiet, gray versions of themselves. Not fear at first. Helplessness. That's the word you'll hear again and again from people who've been out here, when the sea decides the conversation is over. A platform supply crew out of Aberdeen will call it mountain weather at sea. Seas so short and high, the bow punches and punches, and the deck feels like a staircase that can't decide which way is up. They'll tell you deep ocean rough is one thing, shelf rough is another. On the shelf, the waves are stacked. That's a different kind of exhaustion. And then there's the memory that isn't any single person's. The night of 1953, the flood of 1962, the way families on the flats still teach children to read wind, tide, and sky like they're part of the alphabet. In places where the land sits at or below sea level, danger is not an emergency. It's a culture, a long practice of staying ready. People who make a living here learn to read small signals that don't show up on a screen. The texture on the surface, cat's paw patterns that jump before the gust hits, the way foam tears clean off a crest when the wind is about to step up. A color change that says a bar is shallower than the chart suggests. The angle of a standing wave at a harbor mouth that tells you the tide has more push than you planned for. The set on the hull when wind and tide disagree and try to talk you sideways into trouble. These aren't tricks. They're the sea telling you, with pictures, what it intends to do. Instruments are your second set of eyes. Your first set still needs to look. We've just seen what this basin can do when it chooses violence. Now flip the lens. The North Sea is the same. Shallow where you expect depth, quick to change its mood, built to punish mistakes. And yet, there were people who looked at that and said, good. That's our road. They didn't beat the sea into submission. They partnered with it, learned its habits, obeyed its rules, and used its quirks as leverage. Until the water that scared everyone else became the backbone of their power. We call them Vikings. Viking isn't a nationality. It's a job description that spread across coastal Norway and Denmark and parts of Sweden. What they built over the 9th and 11th centuries wasn't magic, and it wasn't luck. It was a repeatable system for moving men, goods, and news across a hostile basin faster and more reliably than their neighbors. The system starts with an attitude and ends with an empire. You don't beat the North Sea. You learn its habits and work with them. That's what the Vikings did. They looked at a place most people treated like a wall and used it like a road, not because they were fearless, but because they were careful in ways that add up. Start with the boat. A Viking ship wasn't a heavy box trying to punch through waves. It was light and springy. The side planks overlapped like shingles on a roof, so the whole hull could flex a little when a wave hit. That give kept the wood from cracking. The ship didn't sit deep in the water either. It rode high like a long canoe with a sail. That shallow shape mattered. It could skim across sandbanks, slip into river mouths at high tide, and, if the weather turned ugly, run itself onto a sandy beach and wait. Steering was simple and tough. One big oar lashed to the side like a giant paddle rudder you could fix fast if it wore out. The sail was one square sheet. If the wind got wild, you didn't argue with it. You made the sail smaller, and the oars were always ready. Wind when it helped, muscle when it didn't. That mix is why these ships kept their options. They also sailed on the sea's schedule, not the calendar. Late spring to early fall gave them long days and fewer ice problems. Even then, they watched the sky more than the date. If a window opened, steady wind, steady pressure, clean horizon, they moved. If it didn't, they waited in a safe harbor and did something useful. Patched a seam, traded for food, asked locals about sandbanks that had shifted that year. Waiting wasn't weakness. Waiting kept people alive. Routes looked simple on a map and very smart up close. From Norway, you didn't aim straight across and hope. You hopped. Norway to Shetland, Shetland to Orkney, Orkney to the Scottish coast, then down toward England, with land in sight as often as you could manage. From Denmark, you slid behind the Friesian and Dutch islands, where the coast is low and full of tidal flats. Twice a day those flats change. Mud turns to water, water turns to mud. To a stranger, that's a trap. To someone who knows it, that's a secret road. The Vikings learned those roads by asking people who lived there and paying them fairly. A pilot who knows one tricky channel is as good as a new sail. Navigation wasn't magic. It was a lot of small clues added together. They used a rope with a weight on the end and a bit of sticky fat under the weight. Drop it, pull it up, and the fat brings back a smear of the seafloor. Sand, shell, mud. Each mix tells you where you are along a coast you already know well. Watercolor helps too. It goes pale over shallow banks, darker over deep channels. Birds help in the evening. Gannets and other seabirds feed offshore but sleep on land. The lines they fly at dusk point toward the coast. The edge of a cloud can even reflect a brighter strip above water that's shallower. When the sky cleared, the sun and stars were welcome. When it didn't, they trusted the coastline stored in their heads. The sound of breakers around a point you can't see yet. The shape of a headland against the light. The smell of mud on a falling tide. None of this is glamorous. All of it is reliable. Tide was the real boss. River mouths and sandbars are doors that open and shut on a clock. Show up on the rising tide and the door opens. More depth, easier entry, less risk. Leave on the falling tide and the current helps push you out to sea. This same rhythm turned into simple tactics. If you needed to land fast, you rode the flood in, did your business, and let the ebb carry you away before a larger force could gather. On long runs down the coast, A fair tidal stream is like free fuel. In the flats, timing meant everything. People who didn't respect the clock stuck their ship in mud. People who did could disappear behind an island, sit safely on hard sand while the water left, and refloat a few hours later with no one the wiser. Handling North Sea waves is less about bravery and more about rhythm. The waves here are often short and close together. If the bow is slamming, up, drop, bang, you change the angle a little until the motion turns into a firm rise and fall. If the wind jumps, you make the sail smaller before a big gust tears it. If the timing between waves feels wrong, you add a little speed with the oars or take a little away so the hull stops free falling off crests. If the wind and the current are trying to glue you to the coast, you don't bluff your way out. You lower the sail, put the oars out, and work the boat off at the angle you can actually hold. And if the day still goes bad, you head for a beach you've already picked as a safe place. A shallow ship on sand can be fixed and refloated. A deep ship pinned on rocks becomes a story people tell about what not to do. Around all of this sat a boring, life-saving routine. Someone was always on lookout, not just staring, but reading the water's texture and the sky's lines. Gear was checked at every change of watch. The leather on the steering oar was replaced before it failed. Seams got fresh tar when the sun warmed the pitch. Heavy things were tied low and near the middle. Food and firewood were kept dry. Sloshing water on the floor was treated like a threat and bailed out fast. Even the painted shields hanging along the rails had a job beyond pride. They knocked down spray, which meant fewer slips and less ice in cold weather. Fog had its own rules. The sail came down, oars came out. The rope and weight went over the side more often. People spoke quietly and listened for breakers and the echo of their own shouts off rock. Anchors went into bottoms known to hold well. If a rope chafed or a plank opened up, that wasn't a message to push harder. It was a message to reach the small harbor you picked on the beach that morning, fix things in daylight, and go when the tide and wind said yes at the same time. Local knowledge filled the gaps. Friesian sailors knew which channels stayed deep on weak tides and which ones were only real during spring tides. Islanders in Orkney knew the gates between islands, where the current runs like a river and throws standing waves that can flip a boat that isn't ready. Along England and Scotland, river pilots knew which sandbars liked to move after a wet winter. The Vikings paid for that knowledge and passed it on to their own crews. That's how one risky crossing turned into a route you could use again next season. Imagine one trip, start to finish. A crew on the Norwegian coast watches the sky for a week. They patch the places where tar looks thin and tap the wedges at the foot of the mast until they sing like a tight drum. They relash the big steering oar before it squeaks. They smear fresh fat on the sounding weight and shift some stones so the bow sits a little higher, better for choppy water. A steady breeze from the north arrives with clear air. So they go. They slide along the skerries with a smaller sail than pride would choose and ease the steering until the bow stops slamming. The jump to Shetland starts at dawn. Fog rises at dusk. The sail comes down. They row at a steady beat. The rope comes up with sand and shell. Good, then mud. Adjust a little, then sand again. In Shetland, a southwest wind sulks for 2 days. They wait, trade for nails, dry what's damp, and listen to a pilot explain which bank moved this year. When the breeze turns fair, they run to Orkney, rest behind a point where the water lies flat, then angle down the Scottish coast with the tide at their back. By the time they reach the Humber, they've already planned to arrive on the rising tide, and they do. The rope tells them sand, the depth grows, and the keel slides over the bar without drama. They beach on firm ground above the high water line and sleep. Nobody makes a speech. Everyone arrives. That's the heart of it. Simple boat, simple habits, smart timing, constant attention. Put together, those choices turned a scary sea into a working road. Crossings became routes. Routes became supply lines. Supply lines became power. When people say the Vikings ruled the waves, it can sound like they crushed the sea into obedience. The truth is better and more useful. They respected the rules this water already had: wind, tide, bottom, and patience, and built their lives to match. That's how the North Sea, with all its moods, carried them. But the North Sea is not only fierce, it can also lull you to sleep. It has a way of laying a blade on velvet. One week it hammers steel until the steel sings. The next, it lies flat as glass under a milky sky. The air is so clean it tastes sweet on the tongue. Gulls write soft script across the wind, and the land seems to lean in to listen. You smell iodine and wet grass. You hear the snatch of a sheep tearing at the turf on a dike. You see a line of bicycles drifting along the horizon as if drawn by hand. From the top of a dune, everything looks harmless. Villages tucked among red brick and thatch, lighthouses blinking like metronomes, the tide so calm it feels like deliberate breathing. Here, beauty is not decoration. It works like a charm, loosening the jaw, lowering the shoulders, whispering that nothing is wrong. And that is also why the North Sea is dangerous. Two faces of a sea that ties together half of Northern Europe. A place of peace and of upheaval. Twice a day, the tide takes the throne. Water becomes land, and land becomes water. Twice a day, the tide takes the throne. Water becomes land, and land becomes water. Germany's Wadden Sea. When the tide falls, the world expands. From atop a dike, you can see a gray-brown plain stretching to the horizon, cut by tiny creeks that snake like capillaries. From here, it looks empty. Step down, and it's crowded. Under your boots lies one of the most fertile surfaces on the planet, a living carpet of microalgae. Snails leave scribbled lines. Lugworms do their slow but vital work. Each one shifts whole buckets of sand a year, aerating the flats like thousands of miniature gardeners. Those little coils you see, as if someone scattered soft noodles everywhere? Worm castings. Proof the ground itself is busy. An oyster catcher, black and white with a carrot-red bill, drops beside you and starts the easiest job in the world, picking. Tap, 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 their breakfast is done. Mussels lie just under a thin skin of mud. Crabs burrow deep and hope nobody notices. But hope doesn't last here. At low tide, the buffet opens. Look up, and the sky is full of wings. This is a crossroads on the migration route from the Arctic down to Africa. A rest stop for passports stamped on both hemispheres. Bar-tailed godwits arrive with legs built for miles, not meters. Red knots land in brick-red breeding coats that will soon fade to gray. Brent geese drift in with voices like a polite argument. The numbers sound made up, millions. But stand here in late autumn or early spring, watching the entire tidal flat lift into a flying sheet of silk, and you'll believe. The Wadden is a wellness resort for feathers. On the dike, sheep shape the landscape. Not postcard ornaments, maintenance crew. Their hooves press the grass down, their teeth keep it short. Tight turf is a stronger shield when storms drive the water inland. Old lighthouses keep watch. New storm gates close with a mechanical groan. The horizon holds a stubborn straight line, a stroke of human persistence against a sea that never forgets what it can do. Now follow a postman with a route that would make city couriers blink. He doesn't pedal along streets, he times the tide. Out on the flats, small mounds rise like commas. The Helgoland, ancient marsh islands that flood in storms, but sit warm and quiet on fair days. People live there. A single house, a patch of grass, maybe a cow. The mail boat lowers a cart at low water, its tires crunching on wet sand. A mailbox waits on a doorstep that knows both salt spray and afternoon sun. Delivery hours are written by the sea. Stand on a halig on a still day and the world is so quiet, you can hear your own jacket rustle. Then try to imagine a storm surge night, when the water climbs the steps and the house stands alone in the dark, the wind starting its work. Two faces of the same sea, says a woman who has lived here all her life. She hangs laundry in the breeze that smells faintly of iodine. She reads the tide the way city people read a bus schedule. Today, only 10 halogen remain in Germany, the last ones not yet swallowed by the North Sea. Whoever lives here is at the very heart of Europe, yet also in an entirely different world. And if you need a few numbers to remember this place before turning your eyes to a massive block of rock in the middle of the North Sea, the Wadden Sea sustains 10 to 12 million migratory birds each year. At its peak, it holds more than 6 million at once. This is the largest tidal flat on the planet, recognized as a World Heritage Site because it still works the way the sea made it, not the way we want it to. Before you stands the massive rock in the middle of the North Sea, Helgoland, where cliffs gnawed by the elements are always at risk of being broken down by the sea. Helgoland rises like a fortress of sandstone, compressed sand hardened into walls, dark red in its body, topped with a thin crown of green grass. A short stretch of water away lies Duna, Helgoland's gentle little sibling. Nothing but sand, beaches, and low curves at wave height. Two islands, like two halves of the North Sea's character, set side by side, one upright, one lying calm. Helgoland is the city of the northern gannet, a large seabird with a white body, pale golden head, and a blue ring around the eye, like eyeliner already drawn. They keep strict boundaries on the cliff edge, each nest spaced exactly one beak length apart to cut down on fights. When hunting, gannets turn themselves into spears. A bird circles once, locks its body into the wind, folds its wings tight into a V like a drawn line, then drops. The thump as it pierces the surface sounds almost like a hand clapping a taut canvas. It vanishes into the blue, then pops back up, shaking its head like a dog out of a pond, with a strip of silver flashing in its beak, a fish of the sun. These birds also have a crafty habit, collecting anything at all to build nests: green leaves, drift debris, anything for the family. And the lazy ones? They steal from their neighbors, just don't get caught. Beside them, another cliff edge is packed with guillemots, called that in Europe, known as common murres in North America. Dark brown-black backs, white bellies, standing shoulder to shoulder along the rim. They don't build nests in the usual sense. Each bird lays only one egg, pointed at one end, and that shape is no accident. The egg rolls in a circle instead of rolling straight off the cliff into the sea. Do you see? By the end of the season, the cliffs turn into a stage for the guillemot chicks' first jump. The young birds, plump from their parents' care, still don't know how to fly. Below them, the sea lies about 30 meters down. The father calls from the water. Steady, patient calls. The chick steps to the edge, looks down at a world like a misprinted page, and leaps. The splash is tiny. It's unharmed. Its body light, its down thick, and it immediately swims toward the call. A few weeks later, father and chick are just two small dots on the sea, learning routes without markings, paths only wings can read. Yet the treasure of Helgoland, if you ask those who live here, lies beneath the surface. The shallow seabed is a small neighborhood of creatures few remember by name. Hermit crabs, borrowing abandoned shells for homes, trading up as they grow. Sea anemones, looking like flowers, but animals in truth. When open, their petals are tentacles for catching prey. And cold water corals, kin to their tropical relatives, thriving in cooler seas, their bodies soft like tiny trees. Brown crabs, also called crabby, shuffle sideways like grumpy old men. Helgoland lobsters, deep blue, poke their antennae into stone corridors like fussy landlords. If you're lucky, you might spot a small cat shark. Scientifically, the lesser spotted dogfish, lying still against the rocks, its speckled back blending perfectly with shifting light on seaweed. Their camouflage is so precise that sometimes even seals, those indiscriminate eaters, give up. Island life doesn't wait for you. Divers return to shore with memory cards full of flowers that eat and trees that swim. Fishermen watch the weather, squeezing workdays into the narrow gaps between the sea's moods. On the pier, tonight's menu waits in plastic crates. Brown crabs, lobsters, whitefish. At sunset sometimes, if the air is clear and the horizon drawn thin as a pen stroke, you can catch a small optical gift, the green flash. At the exact instant the sun's upper rim disappears, a narrow blade of green flares, then vanishes. The cause lies in layers of air at different temperatures, bending light. The green part is refracted to your eye for just that instant. Knowing the science doesn't spoil it, people still laugh the first time they see it, as if the world just performed a private magic trick. The ancient Egyptians mentioned it. Jules Verne, the French novelist, remarked, "If heaven has a color, it must be this green." Right next to Helgoland lies the sand island of Duna. From Helgoland, it's just a few minutes by boat to Duna. a low strip of sand with sloping shores and shallow, clear water. On the beach, signs remind visitors to keep their distance. Look closely and you'll see gray bodies scattered across the sand. These are gray seals, the largest marine mammals in Germany. Adults weigh a few hundred kilos. On the sand, they lie still, sunbathing, drying their coats and molting with the seasons. The scene is peaceful. Gentle waves, steady wind, and now and then the sound of a snort. At the water's edge, you'll spot round heads popping up and diving again. These are curious seals swimming closer to watch. They have large black eyes and long, sensitive whiskers, tools for detecting water movement and finding fish. They surface a few dozen meters away, watch for a moment, then dive and come up a little nearer. Don't wave or try to approach them, just stand still, keeping the recommended distance, usually 30-50 meters, and it will be safe for both you and them. In winter, Duna becomes a breeding ground. Seal pups are born with thick white fur to keep them warm on the cold sand. They grow fast, from about 10 kilos at birth to nearly 50 kilos after only 3 weeks. The reason is their mother's milk, extremely rich in energy, about 50% fat. The mother leaves the shore only a few times a day to hunt, then returns to nurse before heading back out again. The pup waits on the sand, sleeping most of the time, sometimes calling for its mother. Once it has stored enough fat and grown a new waterproof coat, it begins practicing swimming in very shallow waves. You might also see large males, bulls, growling, sliding back and forth, and butting each other. This is their contest for prime spots and mating rights. It looks fierce, but most of the time it stops at intimidation, rarely causing serious injuries. The long scars across their necks and shoulders are the maps of old battles. The most important things on a breeding beach are space and escape routes. Don't stand between a pup and the sea. The mother may be offshore watching, and if she feels threatened, she won't come ashore. Don't get too close for photos. Frightened pups can flee, lose their mothers, and quickly exhaust themselves. On Duna, conservation staff are usually present to remind visitors to step back when necessary. When the tide rises, the whole beach changes. The scattered bodies slowly roll into the water, disappearing into a field of bobbing gray heads. On the sand remain only the smooth tracks, where each one slid down. The sea surface flattens, and now and then a seal's head appears, looks around, and dives again. The island returns to waves and wind, simple, clear, and as straightforward as their own rhythm of life. Leaving the sand island of Duna, leaving Germany, we arrive in Denmark, to the tidal flats, sand islands, and nomadic dunes of Jutland. The coastline flattens, the horizon opens, the colors soften. Gray-green water, a pale sky, a low strip of sand. This is the Danish part of the Wadden Sea, a world where the sea also withdraws twice a day and politely returns the seabed to you as in Germany. At low tide, the water recedes and a layer of ground appears. Gleaming mud and fine sand firm enough to walk on if you know where to place your steps. 6 hours later, the sea returns, and everything you saw is once again underwater. The border blurs as you cross the marshes northward. The brick tower of Ribe, Denmark's oldest town, rises from a wet green carpet. At the end of a raised causeway stands the steel floodgate, Kammersluis, a massive door between field and sea. Whenever a low-pressure system growls offshore, the keeper locks it. The river holds still as if holding its breath, while on the seaward side, waves pound the barrier as though knocking to come in. This whole region lives by a simple habit: watch the sky, read the sea, open and close at the right moment, so the villages inside can breathe steadily like a chest. From here, a road straight as a string leads you to an island that exists just long enough to cross. Mandu. No bridge. At low tide, a path of shells and sand appears across the water. Locals run the Mando tractor bus, a passenger trailer hitched to a tractor, ferrying visitors across the shallow sea. You sit in a wooden cabin, salty wind slipping through the windows, wheels marking 2 dark tracks across the sand. Twice a day, this road disappears, not with bells, but with the tide tables posted at the post office. On the island, a low church, meadows against the water, and wooden stakes marking the way home. All placed in the only position possible, just high enough above the sea's reach, just low enough beneath the sky. Follow the coast a few more hours, and Fanu and Rumu spread out like 2 bright rugs. These barrier islands lie off southwest Denmark, part of the Wadden Sea. They are like sandy eyelids between the North Sea and the mainland. The outer side takes the waves. The inner side shelters salt marshes and villages. Rumu has La Coque, one of the widest beaches in Europe. Flat, hard, smooth, so firm that cars can drive on dry sand when signs allow. On days with a south wind, the beach turns into a carnival of air. Kite buggies skimming across, their sails as big as boat canvas pulling riders like arrows. Children chase colored shadows on the sand. Adults brace against the wind, holding taut lines, while the sea itself lies still, a fabric for the sky to stitch on. Fano is gentler. Thatched roof houses in Sunderho, narrow winding lanes, the sweet tang of damp wood. From the harbor, seal safari boats take you out to sandbanks where harbor seals, smaller than gray seals, line up to bask. The boats keep their distance. The round black heads pop up now and then like punctuation marks on the water. In late summer and early autumn, the skies over the marshes of Tunder and Ribe stage a spectacle called Sort Sol, black sun. Just before sunset, starlings gather into a living cloud, a mass shifting shape continuously, now a whirlpool, now a storm, now a whale swimming across the sky. As the last light pours through, the whole flock becomes a thin black lace. No wires hold them, no conductor leads them. Each bird reads only its neighbor, yet together they form a dance that makes the whole field hold its breath. When the flock pours down into the reeds, the sound is like gentle rain on paper, a rustle you never forget. Leaving the marshes, The West Jutland coast runs ruler straight. Wind carves the waves into parallel white ridges. Behind the shore lie fixed dunes pinned by grass, then pine forests planted a century ago as windbreaks. Suddenly, a block of concrete rises from the sand, a bunker of the Atlantic wall. Some tilt sideways, some jut out like the backs of whales. In Blovand, a seaside town and resort on Jutland's west coast, stands the Tirpitz Museum, hidden under sand, showing only low glass edges like a cave entrance. Beneath are galleries about sand, wind, amber, and a time when the sea was a front line. Step back out into the sunlight, and you smell resin, salt, and hear sand crunch under your shoes, the sound of a landscape always on the move. Farther north, Jutland begins to tell its most unique story. Migrating dunes. At Ropfjörg Mile, an entire hill of sand nearly a square kilometer wide is walking across the peninsula, creeping 10 meters a year under the west wind. Climb to the summit. Pure wind, pure sand, not a stone in sight. Footprints fill in within a few breaths. Look out, and you see the dunes slowly swallowing sparse forest on one edge, while leaving open land behind, like a gentle animal shifting its bed. Near Lundstrup, the Rubjerg Knude lighthouse teeters on a sand cliff being gnawed by the sea. In recent years, Danes decided to push the whole lighthouse inland, setting it on steel rails, pulling it bit by bit, so it could keep working for many more years. A small structure in a vast landscape, saved by understanding the temper of sand and wind. At the tip of Skagen, the light changes. Two bodies of water meet at Grennen. On one side, Skagerrak, opening into the North Atlantic. On the other, Kattegat, gateway to the Baltic. Waves run diagonally from both directions, colliding into a pleated line. On shore stands the sand-covered church, Den Tilsandede Kirke. Its tower, all that remains. Once, worshippers had to dig paths through sand to attend services. When it became impossible, the church surrendered. Here, faith was measured not only in prayers, but in how many shovelfuls of sand people could clear from their doorway each week. From Denmark, crossing the gray water, the coast of Norway rises like a wall of stone. This is fjord country. Deep, narrow sea inlets, flanked by vertical cliffs. Fjords were carved when Ice Age glaciers cut U-shaped valleys, then filled when the ice melted and the sea flooded in. That's why a fjord's bottom can sink over 1,000 meters, while its surface remains only as wide as a giant river. On shore, houses cling to the water's edge. Apples still grow thanks to the Gulf Stream carrying warmth here. Beneath your feet is ancient rock. Beneath that rock lies another city of the sea. All of Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, is still rising very slowly, about 1 centimeter a year. The reason? Thousands of years ago, heavy ice sheets pressed the crust down. When they melted, the weight disappeared, and the land began to rebound, like a mattress regaining shape after being compressed. This uplift doesn't shake you, but it is the slow rhythm that explains why this coast is always changing, though at a glacial pace. Dive below the dark blue surface of a fjord, and the scene looks nothing like the imagined world of cold bare rock. In the dim depths, cold water corals grow in clusters like cream-colored bone bushes. These are not tropical corals. They belong to another group. Living in cold, dark water, needing no sunlight or partnership with algae. Nearby, sea anemones bloom like flowers on stone. Featherworms spread delicate fans to filter food, and familiar menu names look strange alive. Norway lobster, small, slender-clawed, living in sandy burrows. Northern stone crab, starfish. This whole seabed is called a cold water coral garden, a real garden, only lit not by the sun, but by a diver's lamp. Sometimes, when the water is calm as glass, you see lion's mane jellyfish drifting past, the signature jelly of these cold seas, with a mane of long, thread-like tentacles and a body amber or copper red. They don't swim fast, but pulse gently like breathing, each beat carrying them a short way. Touch them and it stings. That's the sting of nematocysts. But seen from a boat, they look like living ribbons sliding through water. Farther offshore, where the seabed plunges suddenly, is the stage of giants. Sperm whales, massive square-headed whales, surface to breathe for a few minutes, then dive straight down into the abyss. They hunt using echolocation, blasting out loud clicks that sound like metallic drops striking, then listening to the echoes to map the darkness in 3D. Down there lurk giant squid, rarely seen directly, but the circular scars on whales' skin and squid beaks found in their stomachs tell the rest. These battles happen out of human sight, between creatures whose very shadows would make you hold your breath. In autumn and early winter, when herring schools flood the northern fjords, the surface begins to boil with flashing silver bodies. That is when killer whales, orcas, arrive. Despite their fierce name, they are dolphins, intelligent, hunting in groups. From a boat, you see them herd herring into a tight bait ball. Then one lashes with its tail to stun fish, while others swoop in to eat. Darkness falls quickly at high latitudes, but orcas don't need light. Like sperm whales, they use echolocation, finding schools in the dark by echo. On shore, locals simply watch the seabirds. When gulls and cormorants gather in numbers, it means a feast is happening below. Sometimes, an even older guest glides up from the cold deep, the Greenland shark. They can live close to 200 years, an extraordinary record among fishes, and swim as slowly as a drifting thought. Many are nearly blind from parasites clinging to their eyes. but their keen sense of smell guides them to carrion or easy prey at night. They don't stalk swimmers. They live in the far north, deep and cold, rarely seen in shallow waters. Spotting one is the luck of a diver's lifetime, a dark shadow growing larger, then slipping away as gently as it came. Back at the surface, Norwegian fjords hold a quiet, profound beauty. In early morning, thin mist hangs between cliffs. The water so flat, your boat glides like on a mirror. The engine hums. Droplets fall in rhythm from the bow. On shore, thin waterfalls thread down like white strings. Red-painted wooden houses cling to rare flat patches of ground, glowing warm against the dark stone. It's easy to forget this is the sea. The depth beneath you is greater than the distance you can see across to the opposite cliff. If you need a few keywords to carry with you in Norway, fjord means a deep sea inlet between mountains. Cold water corals are the bushes in the dark seabed. Echolocation is seeing with ears. Sending sound, hearing echoes. Lion's mane jellyfish are beautiful but sting. Greenland sharks are very old and very slow, far from people. Orcas hunt in formation, without light. Sperm whales are the ultimate deep divers here. Put together, it forms a picture of peace with depth. A surface smooth as silk, and beneath it, a natural stage at work in silence. Yet as you cross onto the coast of Scotland, the North Sea changes its voice immediately. The horizon rises into miles of cliffs, and the wind drives waves into endless white bands. Here the high shoreline meets the shallow water of the North Sea, creating a seabird highway, a ribbon of safe cliff edges for nesting, right beside an offshore banquet of fish. From spring into early summer, hundreds of thousands of birds leave the sea, climb the rocks, and turn the cliffs into a noisy city. Right below the Scottish cliffs, puffins, small seabirds with black and white masked faces and brightly colored bills that glow only in breeding season, choose a different way of life. Puffins don't lay eggs on cliff ledges. They dig burrows in grassy slopes, looking like tiny hobbit homes. Out at sea, they are superb divers, reaching depths of 50-60 meters, able to clamp strings of sand eels in their bills, thanks to small spines inside that hold the fish in place. A puffin can return with a shining bundle like a silver comb. In recent years, warming waters have reduced sand eels, forcing puffins to fly farther and dive deeper. But on the right timed days, the landing is crowded. Birds flying out, flying back, each one with a string of fish for its chick, clear and easy to understand. Traveling further south to the English border, the Farne Islands in Northumberland at Scotland's foot are a key stop along this seabird highway. Here, Arctic terns nest right beside the paths. They are strict in the best sense, fiercely protective of their nests. If you get too close, they dive bomb and peck at people's heads, which is why visitors wear hats and stick to the wooden walkways. Arctic terns are the long-distance champions of the bird world. Every year they migrate from the Arctic nearly to Antarctica and back, covering the longest journey of any bird. Watching how seriously they guard their nests, you understand how such a small bird survives a near round-the-world voyage. Leave the cliffs, step into the rocky coves and kelp beds, and you find European otters living right at the waterland line. Otters wear the thickest of coats. A single square centimeter holds as many hairs as a human head. Insulation that keeps them warm in cold seas. Here, they feast mainly on crabs. A familiar scene, an otter gripping a crab in sharp teeth, prying open the lid of its shell like a tin can, eating the soft meat and tossing the husk aside. Sometimes a gray heron waits nearby to scavenge. Minutes later, the otter dives again, threading through brown kelp like a shopper in a familiar market. Above the grassy cliffs, red deer appear in rutting season. Males stand on dew-wet grass, roaring to hold their harem and warn rivals. Not deep in forests, these herds move right to the sea's edge, licking salt from rocks, even eating seaweed, a salty mineral salad. Nearby, you might see highland cattle, long-haired, curved-horned, bred for wind and rain, chewing salt grass at the shore as if the waves didn't matter. Together they give you a very Scotland scene. Cliffs, grass, mist, and large calm animals moving across a knife edge of land. In the right season and place, the North Sea joins hands with the English Channel at Dover, the narrow throat linking the Atlantic to the North Sea. In these waters, and also in some Scottish bays, you may meet the basking shark. Don't let the word shark frighten you. These are plankton feeders, gentle giants that never hunt people. They swim slowly, mouths wide to filter seawater through gills, catching shrimp, fish eggs, and microorganisms. A large one can filter about 1 to 800 tons of water an hour, numbers that give you a sense of the scale of these living machines. From a boat, you'll see their dorsal fins and rounded black heads cutting the surface like small craft. From the steady rhythm of their opening and closing mouths, you know they're feeding, not defending. To leave Scotland, we follow the tidal wave rolling from the Atlantic onto Scotland's east coast, then sliding down England's eastern shore, slipping through the Channel, and racing toward the lowlands. The farther it goes, the cliffs sink lower. Gray stone fades into yellow sand, then into flat meadows like a tabletop. It's exactly where the tide meets the low coast. That is the Netherlands. If in Scotland you stand high above the waves, here in the Netherlands you stand on a dike to be higher than them. This is not just living next to the sea, but living on the sea, a country level with or even below sea level, where green fields exist because pumps run and villages stay calm because dikes hold. Each time a low-pressure storm pushes the water up, the memory of 1953 rings like a bell. The sea can step across the doorstep in a single night. The Dutch answer has never been to flee, but to control. Dikes, sluices, pumping stations, and especially the giant gates that can drop down to turn an estuary into a calm lake. The most famous of them is the Oosterschelde storm surge barrier. In Dutch, Oosterscheldekering. Picture a row of movable gates wedged between colossal concrete piers, stretching across the Oosterschelde estuary for kilometers. On ordinary days, the gates are open, letting the tide breathe in and out, keeping the estuary alive, with fish, shellfish, and birds. When forecasts warn of a surge, the operators lower the gates. In just a few hours, an open seamouth becomes a guarded basin. This is engineering with conscience, protecting safety without killing the ecosystem it must also preserve. And here too, as waters warm, the sea welcomes life, and spring brings one of the strangest visitors in European waters. The common cuttlefish, Sepia officinalis. The name may say fish, but they are not fish. They are cephalopods, kin to squid and octopus, with soft bodies, 10 arms, 2 long ones for catching prey, and an inner white cuttlebone to control buoyancy. They are masters of disguise, able to change color in an instant, shift their skin texture from smooth to spiky, and write signals across their skin like living Morse code. Divers in the Oosterschelde call this spawning season the annual blind date. In late spring, hundreds of cuttlefish drift in from the North Sea, pairing up over eelgrass beds, ropes, or branches that divers sink to create cuttlefish hotels. Males display with bold zebra-like black and white stripes down their bodies. Rivals press close, each one trying to outshine the other. The winner glides beside a female and gently extends his 2 long arms. If she accepts, the male passes a packet of sperm. Then the female sets to work, gluing eggs onto anything: grass, ropes, old nets. The eggs look like clusters of black grapes. Each bury a capsule holding a curled embryo inside. A few weeks later, the eggs shift from dark to smoky clear as the hatchlings grow. Look closely, and you can see the miniature replicas inside, fully formed with arms and eyes coiled in their shells. When they hatch, they can already flip from sand color to jet black in a blink. Parents don't stay to raise them. Their task is done. Most adults will die after spawning. The next tide rolls through, and the Oosterschelde returns to its daily rhythm. Tugging boats, feeding mussel beds and keeping this nation's edge alive. Following the coast eastward from the Netherlands, the lowland shoreline doesn't break. It only changes its name. East Frisia, Ostfriesland, is the coastal region of Lower Saxony, right beside the Wadden Sea. The map tells you that you're back in Germany. The wind, the salt, and the rhythm of the tide tell you nothing has changed. Climb the dike near Greetsiel, an old harbor village with twin windmills, and you'll see a landscape symbol strolling calmly before you, a flock of sheep. In East Frisia, sheep are not just decoration. They are the maintenance crew of the dikes, grazing to keep the grass short and dense, trampling the soil and roots into a tough mat. Look at the turf, smooth as felt, and you'll understand why the region depends on thousands of small hooves working non-stop, with every gust rattling their wool. Beneath them lies the rock and packed earth the whole coast trusts when offshore storms drive water in. On the green crest of the dike, a bright punctuation mark keeps watch over the sea. The Pilsum Lighthouse, a small tower painted in red and yellow stripes. Lighthouses in East Frisia are like commas in the long sentence of the horizon. Sometimes a red dot on a dike, sometimes a tall black and white column at sea's edge. In fog, the foghorn thuds out slow beats, letting ships know their place in a sea where everything looks the same. When night falls, the lighthouse beam sweeps across tidal flats, dark as a whale's back, leaving only the marsh shimmering under the moon and the lonely cries of curlews, their long calls bending like the curve of their bills. On a faraway reed mound, spoonbills change shifts silently at the nest. Each return flashes their spoon-shaped bills like silver spoons. Inside the dike, farmhouse lights string together a thin golden line. Outside the dike, the sea breathes evenly, all of it arranged in a scene so East Frisian. Green dike, white sheep, a bright lighthouse, and overhead, the skyway of birds. In spring, the star here is the spoonbill, Platalea leucorodia, a tall white wader with a flat, spoon-shaped bill. That's the name. Its feeding behavior is easy to read. It wades in shallow water, sweeping its spoonbill side to side like someone sweeping a floor. And anything, shrimp, small fish, that touches the edge is snapped up. In the reed beds and mud islands of the Lower Saxony Wadden Sea National Park, spoonbills have returned to breed after decades of absence. They nest on damp grass patches or low reed hummocks. Simple but safe because the surrounding tide makes it hard for land predators to approach when the water is in. Here, the language of water even shapes the names of villages. Any name ending in ciel, like Carolinensiel, New Harlingersiel, means it has a ciel, a sluice gate through the dike. When the sea is low, at ebb tide, the gate opens, letting rainwater and farmland drainage flow out. When the tide rises, the gate closes, keeping salt water from pushing back in. The whole region lives by this tidal clock. Fishing boats enter and leave on gate time. Farmers open and shut ditches by the schedule, and visitors learn to read tide tables before walking out onto the mud flats. Because on the Wadden flats, a path is only temporary. You follow a water-withdrawn road out, and you must return before the sea writes over it again. From Norddijk, you look out over a thread-like chain of East Friesian islands. Joost, Noorderny, Baltrum, Langug, Spiekerhoog. They are natural breakwaters for the mainland, and at the same time beaches and nature reserves. If the Wadden coast of Germany and the Netherlands is the breadth of the North Sea, then East Frisia is its chest cavity, the place where that breadth becomes useful for both people and birds. Dikes keep the land dry, sheep keep the dikes strong, lighthouses keep ships on course. Spoonbills remind us that shallow water is a nursery of life. Beautiful in the simplest way, peace not because the sea is tame, but because people and nature here both know the hour. The North Sea, a sea with two faces, and both are dangerous. One face is blunt, raw. Westerly winds hammer in, the surface stands up in walls, and suddenly your ship is small on a staircase of waves. The other whispers. Dawn flat as glass, sunset pouring gold over the edge of the water, air so calm you forget the sea ever roared. Fury can strike you down in an hour. Beauty can make you careless in a minute. Both collect interest from complacency. On the map, the North Sea is just a neat patch of blue wedged between islands and continent. In life, it is a tide chart taped to the fridge door. Boots left by the back step, the habit of glancing at the sky before leaving the harbor. People here survive by small things. Reading a ripple to judge the gust, knowing a foghorn's voice. Treating a sign that says, "Don't go down here," like a neighbor's warning. Those simple things, storm bulletins, tide tables, the advice of elders, save lives as well as steal. The beauty of this sea isn't decoration. It seeps into daily rhythm. Walking the dog over dunes, a hot cup of tea behind the dike, a mud-flat path that appears at low tide and lets you walk so far you feel you could touch the horizon. That's what makes people love the sea blindly. And because they love it, they believe today will be the same as yesterday. The sea never promises that. Respect is the life jacket here. Respect the tide board. Respect the signs on the surface. Respect the collective memory of days when the sea spoke loud. Not fear to shrink, but awareness to go on living. To fish, to sail, to guard steel towers offshore, and to still count faces around the table at night. We have walked through both faces. The first half was lessons written in sweat, steel, and names. Why this familiar water can still betray, and the cost of one careless moment. The second half was a slow journey through places calm enough to steal your breath. Sandy shores, tidal flats, cliffs, fjords. To see why people cling so hard. We told it in the rhythm of the tide, but always with one eye on the horizon. To love this sea is to love deeply enough to stay, and clearly enough to return. When you switch off the screen, the sea keeps breathing. Somewhere offshore, a bird still falls like an arrow into the water. A seal pup opens its eyes for the first time, and a lighthouse sweeps its beam across the horizon. Steady, unhurried, unending.